Psalm 27, the light of God shines. Every shadow planned against you disappears, the light that exposes all darkness. When darkness seems to close in around your life, when confusion and fear attempt to surround you like a thick fog, there is one truth that pierces through it all. The Lord is your light and your salvation. Psalm 27 opens with this radiant declaration, a statement that transcends time and speaks to every soul that has ever felt trapped beneath the weight of uncertainty or spiritual warfare. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? These words are not mere poetry. They are a revelation of divine power that shatters every shadow of despair and dismantles the plans of the wicked long before they reach you. There are moments when life feels like a battlefield, when enemies seem invisible, when attacks are not of flesh and blood, but of spirit and thought. Yet the psalmist reminds us that no shadow, no curse, no secret scheme can stand before the blazing presence of God's light. Darkness has no substance of its own. It exists only where light is absent. And when God enters the scene, absence turns into revelation, fear turns into faith, and silence turns into song. Many people do not understand that spiritual opposition often intensifies right before divine revelation. When the enemy senses breakthrough approaching, he tries to cloak your path in confusion. He wants to convince you that you are alone, abandoned, or forgotten. But Psalm 27 breaks that illusion. It reminds you that the one who formed the light itself watches over you. You are not walking through darkness. You are walking through a divine transformation where every hidden intention against you is being exposed by the brightness of heaven. God's light does not simply illuminate your surroundings, it transforms them. When He shines upon your path, He reveals what was hidden, clarifies what was distorted, and burns away the snares of the wicked. The enemy's greatest weapon is deception, but deception only survives where truth is concealed. The presence of divine light is the death of every lie, and as you walk closer to God, those who have plotted against you find themselves stumbling in the very darkness they tried to throw upon your life. Think of all the moments when something should have gone wrong but didn't, when you narrowly escaped, when a door that seemed to close actually redirected you toward a greater purpose. Those moments were not coincidences. They were divine interventions. The light of God was silently working, guiding your steps and redirecting your destiny away from the traps of the unseen. When you dwell under that light, you become untouchable not because you are strong, but because He is near. The psalmist knew this secret well. David was pursued, betrayed, and surrounded by enemies who sought his life. Yet he refused to let fear write his story. Instead, he fixed his eyes on the brilliance of God's faithfulness. That same faithfulness surrounds you today. Every plot, every false word, every weapon formed in hidden corners of envy or hatred loses its power under divine exposure. The shadows that once followed you will vanish, because the light you carry is not of this world, it is eternal. God's light does more than protect, it sanctifies. It purifies the heart of the believer so that you no longer live reacting to darkness but radiating His presence. The moment you shift your focus from what is against you to who is within you, the battle changes. You no longer plead for light. You realize you are walking with the light Himself. The power that once parted seas and silenced storms now stands in your defense. When you pray Psalm 27, you are not reciting words. You are activating a spiritual reality. You are proclaiming that every evil force trying to hide in the corners of your life must flee. The light of God does not negotiate with shadows, it consumes them. So even if you feel surrounded by unseen opposition, remember this: every hidden enemy is already blinded, every trap is already dismantled, and every shadow planned against you is already erased by the brilliance of divine truth. Stand firm in this assurance. The God who lights your path is the same God who guards your destiny. His illumination is not momentary, it is eternal. The fire that once guided Israel through the wilderness still burns for you. No night can overcome it, and no enemy can extinguish it. If you are hearing this now, it means that heaven has already begun to shift things in your favor. The same light that once delivered David will expose every false friend, dissolve every lie spoken against you, and replace every curse with blessing. You are not forgotten. You are being refined, revealed, and raised in the light of divine favor. When the Lord shines, darkness must flee. When he speaks, confusion turns to clarity. When he moves, no force of hell can resist. This is the unshakable truth of Psalm 27, a truth that becomes your shield, your confidence, and your victory. Before you continue, remember, if you believe that the light of God is already working in your life, subscribe to this channel and stay connected to messages that awaken your faith and remind you that every shadow against you disappears when God shines. Faith is not a passive belief. It is a living force that rises from the heart of those who trust God, even when everything around them seems uncertain. In Psalm 27, the light of God is not only a symbol of his presence, but also the foundation of unwavering faith. The Lord is my strength. Of whom shall I be afraid? Faith becomes the invisible shield that allows a soul to walk through storms untouched, to face unseen opposition without trembling, and to rest in peace even when surrounded by chaos. Faith is not blindness. It is the highest form of vision, the kind that sees God's hand even when the world appears dark. To walk in faith means to step forward when logic tells you to retreat. It means to trust that every invisible battle has already been fought and won in the spiritual realm before you even see results in the natural one. The person of faith understands that what we perceive as delay is often divine preparation. God is not slow. He is thorough. He does not rush the process of transformation because he knows that true light must be rooted deeply within us before it can shine outwardly without being extinguished by the winds of trial. Faith is not proven in the easy seasons of life, but in the moments of silence when God seems distant and shadows appear closer. Those are the moments when faith whispers, "Be still. He is still working." Faith holds its ground when emotions crumble, when understanding fails, and when prayers seem unanswered. True faith does not require evidence because it lives from revelation. It knows that God's promises are not mere words. They are spiritual laws written into the fabric of reality. Every word that proceeds from his mouth becomes light, and that light guides those who dare to believe even when the path seems invisible. When you stand in faith, every arrow of darkness loses direction. The enemy's strategies depend on fear, fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of being forgotten. But faith neutralizes fear. Where fear says, "You are alone," faith answers, "The Lord is my light." Where fear says, "You will fall," faith declares, "The Lord upholds me with his righteous hand." Fear thrives in imagination, while faith thrives in revelation. The more you feed your faith through the Word of God, the less power fear has to shape your future. The psalmist's confidence did not come from arrogance, but from intimacy. He knew God not as a distant ruler, but as a present refuge. He could declare, "Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear," because he had already seen what others could not see. He saw divine protection encircling him. He saw the unseen walls of light that no weapon could penetrate. That same protection surrounds you even now. The problem is that most people do not recognize divine covering because they are looking with natural eyes. Faith opens a different vision, one that perceives God's movement in every still moment. In every believer's journey, there comes a point when faith must confront the unseen. You may not see the full picture, but you are called to walk as though the light were already shining ahead. Each act of trust becomes a declaration to heaven that you believe in God's power more than in the evidence of your fears. Each time you choose peace over panic, forgiveness over vengeance, prayer over despair, you strengthen the walls of your spiritual fortress. That fortress is not made of stone, but of confidence, a confidence that says, "Even if I do not understand, I will still trust." Faith is not the denial of reality. It is the acknowledgement that divine reality is greater. The shadows may whisper that your situation is hopeless, but faith listens to a different voice, the still, steady voice of the Spirit, reminding you that light has the final word. Every dark valley, every silent season, every unanswered prayer is part of a divine orchestration that will eventually reveal the magnitude of God's wisdom. What seems like delay is often protection. What feels like loss is often redirection. Faith allows you to stand firm until the hidden plan of God unfolds before your eyes. Many do not realize that faith is also a weapon. It is not only defensive but also offensive. When you believe, you weaken the hold of darkness. Every doubt surrendered to trust sends a ripple through the spiritual realm. Faith confuses the enemy because it operates outside of his domain. He thrives on fear, confusion, and reaction. But faith is calm, silent, and immovable. It does not argue with darkness. It simply stands and lets the light of God speak through endurance. That endurance is not passivity. It is power under control. It is the posture of someone who knows that battles are won in stillness, not in panic. Faith transforms prayer into authority. When a person of faith prays, they are not begging heaven to move. They are aligning with what heaven has already decreed. Faith does not manipulate God's will, it reveals it. It reminds the believer that every promise written in Scripture is a covenant, not a suggestion. And once you stand under that covenant, no curse, no plan, no opposition can override it. The shadows may form, but they cannot prevail. They may threaten, but they cannot enter. The shield of faith deflects what words cannot describe: invisible arrows, subtle doubts, spiritual fatigue. When faith rises, the unseen realm trembles. There is a hidden truth in Psalm 27 that few notice. David's confidence was not only in deliverance, but in proximity. He longed to dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of his life. He understood that faith is strongest where intimacy is deepest. You cannot sustain faith without relationship. You can repeat verses and declarations, but without communion with the one who speaks them, words remain powerless. Faith is born from the presence of God, from the quiet moments where you realize that the Creator of the universe listens when you speak and responds even when you cannot hear. When faith becomes mature, it no longer depends on feelings. It moves beyond emotion into conviction. It can worship in the middle of disaster because it knows that the story is not over. It can thank God for victories not yet seen because it understands that the promise is as real as the manifestation. Faith does not panic when surrounded by shadows. It remembers that the same God who led you through the last valley will lead you through this one. And if he allowed the storm, it is because the light inside you is ready to grow brighter. You must remember that faith does not remove battles, it redefines them. It teaches you that every attack is not meant to destroy you, but to expose the power of God working through you. The greater the opposition, the greater the revelation. Faith interprets adversity as training. It teaches you endurance, focus, and spiritual discernment. Without opposition, your faith would remain theoretical, but when the fire comes, what is superficial burns away, and what is eternal remains. That is why Scripture says, "The trial of your faith is more precious than gold." The enemy's attacks are not proof that you are weak. They are confirmation that you carry something worth fighting for. When you live by faith, you begin to notice divine patterns. You see that what once terrified you now teaches you. You understand that every delay is divine choreography. The shadows that once intimidated you become irrelevant because you have learned that the light is within you. And that light does not depend on external circumstances. It flows from the eternal Spirit who dwells inside your soul. Even when the world darkens, that inner light does not fade. It only grows more radiant under pressure. Faith teaches surrender, not as defeat, but as mastery. It allows you to stop controlling outcomes and start trusting divine order. The human mind seeks certainty, but faith seeks alignment. It does not demand answers, it embraces mystery. When you trust God fully, you stop negotiating with fear, you stop trying to understand every trial, and instead you begin to rest in the knowing that all things work together for good for those who love Him. This rest is not laziness, it is authority. It is the realization that worry adds nothing to your destiny and that peace is the greatest act of warfare. The beauty of faith is that it grows in the unseen. You do not realize how strong your faith has become until the next storm arrives, and you find yourself calm instead of panicking. You notice that what once caused sleepless nights now only deepens your worship. You discover that the same shadows that once made you afraid now serve as proof of how far you have come. Faith matures you. It turns panic into prayer, fear into focus, and doubt into devotion. You start walking differently, not because life got easier, but because your spirit became unshakable. Psalm 27 is a hymn of spiritual maturity. It is not about avoiding battle, but about standing in light while surrounded by darkness. Though war rise against me, in this I will be confident. That confidence is not arrogance, it is surrender. It is knowing that the outcome is already written in your favor. It is understanding that no shadow can alter what God has decreed. Every threat against your peace is already neutralized by His promise. Every invisible enemy is already blinded by His brilliance. And faith allows you to live from that victory even before you see it unfold. Sometimes the greatest expression of faith is silence. When you stop arguing with those who misunderstand you, when you stop reacting to every attack, when you stop explaining your purpose to those who cannot see it, that is faith. It is the quiet confidence that truth defends itself. It is knowing that the same God who called you will also vindicate you. Faith gives you the courage to stand still while heaven fights for you. It gives you the discernment to see that not every confrontation deserves your energy. Some battles are won not by words, but by peace. Faith also refines perception. You begin to realize that the shadows you once feared were never as powerful as they appeared. Most of them were illusions, magnified by anxiety. Faith brings divine perspective. The ability to see that light has always been stronger, that the enemy's power is temporary, and that no curse can outlast God's blessing. You begin to interpret difficulties as invitations to witness God's glory, and once that shift happens, nothing can shake you again. There is a reason why Jesus often said, "Your faith has made you whole." Faith is not merely a belief in God's existence, it is participation in His nature. It connects you to divine order. It brings heaven into motion on your behalf. When faith moves, angels act, doors open, and chains break. You might not see it immediately, but in the spiritual dimension, reality is already changing. Faith is the bridge between what is promised and what is manifested. And that bridge cannot collapse under pressure because it was built by divine design. The secret is to feed your faith daily. Every prayer, every act of gratitude, every moment you choose to trust instead of worry strengthens your connection to divine light. Faith must be nourished with truth, guarded against negativity, and exercised through obedience. When you walk in faith long enough, miracles stop surprising you. They become the natural result of divine partnership. You stop asking if God will move and start thanking Him because you know He already has. And in that place of confidence, the shadows lose their identity. They may try to whisper, but their voices fade. The darkness cannot manipulate a heart anchored in faith. It cannot distort what has been illuminated by truth. And the moment you realize that faith is not a reaction, but a position, you will stop fearing shadows altogether. You will stand in light and let that light speak for itself. So, when you feel surrounded, do not look at the storm. Look at the light. When doubts rise, remind yourself of every time God came through for you. Faith is cumulative. It grows stronger each time you remember. The past miracles you've experienced are not random. They are foundations for future victories. Every deliverance, every answered prayer, every unexpected blessing is proof that God is consistent. And if He was faithful before, He will be faithful again. This is the message of Psalm 27. Not that there will be no shadows, but that they have no power over you. Faith is your shield, invisible but unbreakable. It does not promise the absence of battle, but it guarantees victory through endurance. The light that shines within you is the same light that once said, "Let there be," and creation obeyed. That light cannot be defeated. It cannot be dimmed. It lives within every believer who chooses to trust more than to fear. And so, as you walk through your own valleys, hold this truth close. You are not surrounded by enemies. You are surrounded by promises. You are not abandoned. You are being refined. You are not losing. You are learning to see beyond what eyes can see. Every shadow planned against you disappears, not because you fight harder, but because you believe deeper. Faith is your shield, and light is your weapon. Together they make you unstoppable. Before you continue, if this message has reminded you that faith is your shield and that God's light still surrounds you, subscribe to this channel and stay connected to receive more revelations that strengthen your spirit and remind you that every shadow planned against you disappears when you walk by faith. When the psalmist said, "One thing I have desired of the Lord, that will I seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life," he was revealing the core of divine protection, not found in physical strength or earthly shelter, but in presence. The presence of God is not a place you visit. It is a reality you inhabit. It is not confined to temples made of stone, but lives within the heart of every soul that surrenders completely. To dwell in the presence of God is to exist beyond fear, beyond the reach of confusion, beyond the influence of every invisible weapon. When His presence fills your atmosphere, darkness has no air left to breathe. In a world filled with uncertainty, human beings look for safety in many places. Some trust in wealth, some in power, some in relationships, and others in their own understanding. But every form of earthly refuge eventually fails because it was never designed to hold the weight of eternity. The psalmist understood this when he wrote Psalm 27. He had armies, he had warriors, he had the crown of Israel, yet his greatest desire was not to expand his kingdom, but to remain near the heart of God. He knew that in the secret place of divine presence, no arrow of envy, no whisper of betrayal, no shadow of death could harm him. The presence of God is a fortress that cannot be penetrated. It is not merely a protective bubble around you. It is a living fire that consumes what is unholy, heals what is wounded, and restores what is broken. Many believers seek God's hand, but not His presence. They want blessings without communion, miracles without transformation. But the psalmist reminds us that safety is not in what God gives. It is in who He is. When you dwell in His presence, you stop chasing external security and begin to experience internal invincibility. The storms may rage, but the peace within you remains unshaken. The presence of God is not emotional. It is not measured by goosebumps or tears, but by transformation. It is the quiet assurance that even when nothing makes sense, you are exactly where you are meant to be. When you walk in that presence, the unseen becomes irrelevant. The voices of fear grow distant. You stop reacting to shadows because you are too focused on the light that fills the room. That light is not outside you, it radiates from the Spirit dwelling within. The Holy Spirit is the manifestation of God's presence in human form, His eternal companionship that turns solitude into sanctuary and chaos into stillness. When you cultivate that awareness of divine presence, you begin to live differently. You no longer measure success by outcomes but by alignment. You stop praying for escape and start praying for endurance. You stop asking God to remove your enemies and start thanking Him for surrounding you with His light. This is what it means to dwell in the house of the Lord, to live constantly conscious of His nearness. The world may see you standing alone, but in the Spirit you are surrounded by hosts of angels, encased in divine glory, and guarded by a love that cannot fail. The presence of God cannot coexist with fear. Fear cannot enter where His presence abides. That is why the enemy's first tactic is always distraction. He does not need to destroy you if he can disconnect you from awareness of God. He whispers chaos into your thoughts, inflates problems beyond proportion, and floods your senses with anxiety so that you forget the nearness of the one who holds your breath. But the moment you remember Him, truly remember, the illusion dissolves. Light returns, and peace reclaims its throne. The reason the psalmist longed for God's presence was not because it was a pleasant feeling, but because it was a place of revelation. In that secret chamber, he saw truth as it really was. The noise of the world fades and divine clarity emerges. In the presence of God, confusion cannot survive because truth is light. Lies lose their structure. Manipulation loses its grip. Fear loses its voice. You begin to see every situation not from the perspective of defeat, but of destiny. You realize that what looked like opposition was often divine orchestration designed to refine you, not ruin you. Many people pray for protection but resist intimacy. Yet intimacy is the foundation of divine defense. The closer you are to God, the smaller the enemy becomes. When you walk in constant awareness of His presence, the enemy's plans become powerless because they cannot reach into the realm of light where you abide. The devil cannot dwell in the same dimension as divine presence. He thrives in ignorance, in the absence of awareness. But once you recognize that the Spirit of God lives within you, you carry the very atmosphere of heaven wherever you go. You are not trying to enter His presence. You are revealing it through your obedience and peace. This is why Jesus could sleep during a storm. It was not because He ignored the danger, but because He lived in a different realm, a realm where waves obeyed His voice. That same presence is available to every believer. You do not need to beg for it. You need to awaken to it. When you realize that the Creator of the universe walks with you, anxiety loses its justification. You begin to move through life, not as a victim of circumstance, but as a vessel of divine order. The world may tremble, but you remain calm, not because you are fearless by nature, but because you are filled with the one who casts out all fear. Psalm 27 is not just a poem of confidence, it is a spiritual map. It shows how proximity to God creates immunity from harm. For in the day of trouble, He shall hide me in His pavilion. That pavilion is not a physical structure, it is the covering of His glory. To be hidden in God means that your enemies may look for you, but cannot find you. They may speak your name, but it will fall powerless in the air. They may plan against you, but every plan will dissolve before it can touch your destiny. You become invisible to destruction because you are visible only to grace. There is a mystery in divine hiding. When God hides you, it is not punishment, it is preservation. He often conceals His chosen ones in seasons of preparation. While the world overlooks you, heaven is shaping you. While people question your absence, God is forming your anointing in silence. The cocoon may look like isolation, but it is protection. Every seed must be hidden before it can bear fruit. Every warrior must be trained in secrecy before stepping into victory. The presence of God becomes that secret garden where your roots grow deep enough to sustain future glory. When you dwell in divine presence, you learn the art of stillness. Stillness is not inactivity, it is alignment. It is the awareness that rushing ahead of God is a form of unbelief. Stillness allows your spirit to synchronize with His rhythm. You stop forcing outcomes and start flowing with divine timing. That is the posture of true power. To wait without worry, to move only when guided, and to trust that every delay conceals purpose. Stillness in God's presence is not wasted time. It is preparation for revelation. In those sacred moments, God begins to speak, not in thunder but in whispers. The voice of God is not loud because He is not far. He speaks quietly because He dwells within. When you quiet your thoughts, you will hear His direction more clearly, and what He reveals in private will sustain you in public. Many fall because they neglect the secret place. They seek applause instead of intimacy. But strength does not come from exposure, it comes from communion. The most powerful lives are those hidden in divine presence, where obedience is refined and peace becomes unshakable. Every time you enter the presence of God through prayer, worship, or silence, you're not entering something new. You are remembering what has always been. The Spirit of God has never left you, only awareness fluctuates. That is why discipline in devotion is so vital. You are not earning God's love. You are awakening your spirit to its reality. The more you dwell in His presence, the more immune you become to deception. The more you meditate on His word, the more your heart reflects His character, the more you honor His silence, the more you understand His timing. When the psalmist said, "He shall set me upon a rock," he was describing the stability that presence provides. The rock is not a mountain outside you, but a foundation within you. It is the immovable confidence that comes from knowing you are upheld by something eternal. Even if the world collapses around you, that inner stability remains. The presence of God anchors you beyond circumstances. It allows you to face loss without losing peace, to experience betrayal without bitterness, and to endure waiting without despair. That is the power of divine refuge. Not the absence of storms, but the presence of unshakable calm. God's presence also brings discernment. When you live close to Him, you sense what others overlook. You discern motives behind words, spiritual atmospheres behind actions, and divine timing behind delays. This discernment is not suspicion, it is light. It allows you to walk safely through deceptive environments without absorbing their darkness. The enemy cannot deceive a heart that abides in divine presence because truth becomes instinctive. You begin to know, not by reasoning, but by revelation. That is why the psalmist could see beyond the surface of his enemy's schemes. He lived too close to God to be fooled by shadows. As you grow in presence, prayer changes. You no longer pray to escape, but to align. You stop listing problems and start listening for direction. Prayer becomes less about speaking and more about seeing what God sees, feeling what He feels, and moving where He moves. The presence of God transforms prayer from a request into a relationship, and when that happens, fear disappears because intimacy casts out insecurity. You no longer need to understand everything because you trust the one who does. To dwell in God's presence is to live from eternity while walking through time. It means you no longer measure life by events, but by purpose. You understand that each season, whether joyful or painful, is part of divine architecture shaping your soul. The storms that once frightened you now refine you. The waiting that once felt unbearable now becomes sacred because you know He is there, shaping, molding, preparing. That awareness turns suffering into sanctification. It turns loneliness into encounter. Even when you cannot feel His presence, He is still there. presence is not dependent on perception. The sun still shines even when hidden by clouds. Likewise, God remains constant even when emotions waver. The mature believer learns to trust presence beyond feelings. You may walk through silent nights, but silence does not mean absence. Sometimes God withdraws the sense of his nearness not to punish, but to strengthen. He is teaching you to walk by faith, not sensation. He is teaching you to recognize that his presence is not a momentary comfort, but an eternal reality. When you live from that place, your very atmosphere changes. Rooms feel different when you enter because you carry divine peace. Conversations shift because your words carry weight. Situations align because heaven backs your presence. You become an extension of divine refuge for others, a living temple where the weary can find rest, where the broken can feel warmth, where the lost can see light. That is what it means to dwell in the house of the Lord, to become a reflection of his dwelling within humanity. There is nothing more powerful than a soul that abides in divine presence. Such a person cannot be manipulated by fear, corrupted by pride, or crushed by despair. They move with quiet authority, not because of position, but because of possession. They are possessed by peace. They live as ambassadors of light in a world of shadows. They do not seek revenge because they understand that justice flows naturally from the presence they carry. They do not compete for validation because they already live in the approval of heaven. Psalm 27 reveals that the secret of victory is not in fighting harder, but in dwelling deeper. The deeper your awareness of God's presence, the less power darkness holds over you. You begin to realize that true safety is not physical but spiritual. You may lose things in the natural, but nothing essential can be taken from you because your real treasure is divine companionship. When you walk with God, even in loss you gain, even in silence you hear, even in stillness you move. When David said, "Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me in a plain path because of my enemies," he was acknowledging that only presence can provide clarity. The world complicates things, but the Spirit simplifies. In divine presence, you see clearly which path leads to peace and which to distraction. God's presence teaches wisdom not through theory, but through awareness. You begin to recognize divine timing, discern counterfeit opportunities, and move with grace rather than haste. This awareness transforms how you face adversity. You stop viewing enemies as obstacles and start seeing them as instruments. Their opposition drives you deeper into God's presence. Their criticism pushes you closer to divine truth. Every trial becomes a reminder that the safest place is not distance from conflict, but closeness to God. The more intense the battle, the stronger your refuge becomes. His presence adapts to your need, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a fire, sometimes a cloud, but always there. And when you finally realize that nothing external can touch the peace within, you are truly free. You no longer chase protection because you have become it. The Spirit that guards you now radiates through you. You walk through darkness carrying dawn within your chest. No curse, no betrayal, no manipulation can break what was forged in the presence of God. You become untouchable not because the world spares you, but because heaven sustains you. To live in divine presence is to live fearless. It does not mean recklessness. It means rest. You stop anticipating disaster because you know divine order cannot fail. You stop clinging to people or outcomes because your anchor is unseen. You begin to experience life not as chaos, but as choreography. Every step, even the missteps, lead you closer to the heart of God. That awareness turns anxiety into awe. You stop asking, "Why is this happening?" and start whispering, "What are you revealing through this?" The presence of God is both your armor and your home. You fight from it, not for it. You do not beg for his nearness. You awaken to it. When you walk through fire, he is there. When you cross deep waters, he is there. When you sit in silence, he is there. Nothing can separate you from him, because his presence is not outside, it is within. To dwell in that presence is to dwell in eternity, even while breathing through time. It is to carry heaven inside a human heart. If you can grasp this truth, fear loses all power. You stop being a target because darkness cannot touch what dwells in light. You become a living testimony of Psalm 27, not as a reader but as a reflection. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? That question becomes your identity. It is no longer rhetoric. It is reality. You live from divine awareness, and in that awareness you are untouchable. So as you reflect on this message, remember, your safety is not in isolation, but in immersion in his presence. Every shadow planned against you dissolves the moment you recognize that you dwell in the light of the Almighty. The presence of God is not a promise for tomorrow. It is a power available now. Step into it, dwell in it, and let it redefine every fear, every doubt, every darkness that dares to approach. And before you continue, if you believe that God's presence is your true refuge and that his light surrounds you even now, subscribe to this channel and stay connected to receive more words that strengthen your faith and remind you that every shadow planned against you disappears when you live in his presence. There are moments in life when the air around you feels heavy, when whispers travel through unseen corridors, when betrayal hides behind familiar faces, and when opposition seems to multiply without cause. It is in those moments that Psalm 27 reveals one of its most mysterious truths. When enemies plot in secret, heaven does not panic, it plans. The silence of God is not absence, it is strategy. The quietness of heaven during your storm is not neglect. It is divine orchestration at work. You are never unprotected. You are simply being positioned in a way that the enemy cannot predict. When David wrote this psalm, he was surrounded by conspiracies. His enemies were not always on the battlefield. Many were in his own court, smiling in daylight and scheming in darkness. Yet he refused to live in paranoia because he understood that divine justice does not shout. It moves in stillness. The unseen hand of God works best when the noise of human plans grows loud. The louder the world's plotting becomes, the quieter heaven seems. Not because God is inactive, but because he is setting the stage for a revelation no enemy can undo. When God is silent, he is not indifferent. He is preparing the reversal. The traps set for you are being turned into testimonies. Every tongue that rises against you is being redirected by the same light that exposes darkness. What your enemies think they control, heaven allows only to serve a greater design. Sometimes the silence of God is his loudest declaration that your destiny is untouchable. He does not need to announce his defense, because his presence alone dismantles the plans made against you. Those who plot against a child of God forget that divine timing always prevails. They think their plans are hidden, because they operate in shadows, but every shadow is visible to light. God sees every conversation whispered in envy, every false word spoken in secret, every attempt to manipulate outcomes behind closed doors. He does not react impulsively. He waits until the perfect moment when their confidence blinds them, and then, suddenly, he exposes everything. His justice is patient because it is perfect. Human vengeance seeks immediacy, but divine vengeance seeks revelation, the kind that leaves no doubt about who truly rules. To walk in the light of Psalm 27 is to understand that not all battles are yours to fight. Some conflicts are meant to reveal your endurance, others your faith, and still others are meant to reveal God's sovereignty. The hardest part for the faithful is not fighting, but waiting. Waiting in silence while lies spread, while betrayal circulates, while opposition grows. But that waiting is sacred. It is the classroom of trust. God teaches his children to endure slander without bitterness, to face deception without fear, and to remain still when every instinct screams for action. That stillness is not weakness. It is power under command. It is the posture of those who know that heaven moves most effectively when they do not. The silence of heaven is the space where divine justice takes root. God allows enemies to rise just high enough to make their fall undeniable. He permits their voices to echo long enough to make their silence unforgettable. Every person who plots against divine purpose becomes an unknowing participant in its fulfillment. Judas thought he was betraying Jesus, but he was activating redemption. Joseph's brothers thought they were destroying him, but they were transporting him toward destiny. What was meant to bury you becomes the bridge that carries you higher. This is the mystery of divine silence, that God allows evil to move just far enough to destroy itself. You may not see it now, but every false accusation, every betrayal, every rejection is pushing you deeper into alignment with your calling. When people lie about you, they are not rewriting your story. They are confirming your significance. When doors close unfairly, they are not limiting your path. They are redirecting it toward the one door that no human hand can shut. When friends become enemies and allies become strangers, do not despair. The pruning of relationships is not punishment, it is preparation. God is not removing support, He is revealing sufficiency. In the stillness between betrayal and vindication, God refines your spirit. He removes pride, sharpens discernment, and deepens compassion. He teaches you to love without expectation, to trust without explanation, and to walk without applause. That refinement cannot happen in comfort. It happens in hidden seasons when no one understands your silence, when your motives are questioned, when your integrity is tested. Those who survive such seasons come out not bitter but purified, capable of carrying greater authority without losing humility. The silence of heaven is also the womb of revelation. When you feel most abandoned, heaven is nearest. When you cannot hear God, it is because He is speaking through circumstance instead of sound. He is rearranging events, aligning timing, and preparing outcomes you would not believe, even if He explained them. You think nothing is happening, but everything is shifting. The very silence that feels unbearable is the sound of divine architecture at work. When enemies plot in secret, God does not always remove them immediately. Sometimes He allows them to prosper for a time, because their success will become the evidence of His justice later. When He acts completely. He does not just vindicate, He elevates. He does not just silence the accusers. He transforms their words into witnesses of your restoration. He uses their malice to highlight your grace. That is why Scripture says, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies." Notice that God does not remove them from the scene. He keeps them present so that they can see the feast. Their existence becomes part of the testimony. The psalmist's confidence was not arrogance, it was insight. He had learned through experience that human plans fail when divine purpose prevails. Every conspiracy against him eventually turned into a coronation. Every betrayal pushed him closer to the throne. That is the pattern of divine justice. It transforms attacks into ascensions. What people do to harm you becomes the very material God uses to promote you. And because this process is spiritual, it cannot be accelerated or delayed by human effort. Your only task is to remain faithful in silence. There is a reason the psalm says, "Wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage." Courage is not the absence of fear, it is endurance within it. To wait when wronged, to trust when unheard, to bless when betrayed, that is courage born from faith. It is in those moments of restraint that heaven's light shines brightest through you. You are never more like God than when you choose silence over retaliation, forgiveness over bitterness, prayer over anger. Each act of restraint is a declaration that you trust divine timing more than your own justice. When enemies plot in secret, they are unaware that God already knows their end from their beginning. Their strategies are written in the same script that declares your victory. Their words are permitted only because they will serve as contrast to God's truth. They dig pits unaware that they are preparing their own. The traps meant for you will become their revelation. The stone they roll toward you will roll back upon them, not because you curse them, but because divine law cannot be mocked. Every energy sent against the innocent returns to its source, and the righteous remain untouched. There is a holy reversal in the kingdom of God. Every curse sent toward light transforms into blessing upon arrival. Every plan of destruction turns into construction. Every act of rejection turns into redirection. This is not poetic optimism, it is spiritual principle. God's light is so absolute that even darkness becomes servant to its purpose. That is why you must not waste time explaining yourself to those who misrepresent you. Truth needs no defense, it needs endurance. The longer you remain still, the louder heaven speaks. Some may wonder why God allows wickedness to operate at all. The answer lies in his patience. He gives the wicked time to repent, but when they refuse, their downfall becomes instructional. God uses their pride as proof that no plan can stand against him. He lets them build high towers of arrogance only to bring them down in a way that glorifies his justice. If he silenced them too early, the lesson would be incomplete. Divine silence is not permissive, it is purposeful. It ensures that when judgment comes, it is undeniable. When you live through such seasons, remember this. The silence of God is your protection, not your punishment. He is not ignoring you, he is insulating you. He hides you in his presence while he rearranges the battlefield. While you wait in confusion, angels are moving, circumstances are shifting, hearts are softening, and truth is preparing its moment of unveiling. When that moment comes, there will be no need for you to prove anything. Light will do it for you. The danger of impatience is that it tempts you to step into God's role. You want to defend yourself, expose lies, confront enemies, and accelerate justice. But premature action always damages divine timing. When you fight battles meant for heaven, you lose strength meant for destiny. Silence is not surrender, it is wisdom. It says, I will not fight with words when heaven fights with truth. The greatest warriors of faith know when to speak and when to stay silent. Jesus himself stood before Pilate and said nothing because truth does not debate with confusion. It waits for resurrection. Your resurrection is coming, not just from circumstances, but from perception. Those who misunderstood you will witness your restoration. Those who doubted you will have no choice but to acknowledge grace. And those who conspired against you will see that every shadow they cast only made the light more visible. That is the paradox of divine silence. What feels like abandonment is actually amplification. The quieter God seems, the louder his revelation will be when it comes. Sometimes the victory is not visible because it happens inside. Before God changes your situation, he changes your perception. You begin to see that you were never in danger because the danger was never greater than your destiny. You realize that you did not need to be defended because the one who holds galaxies also holds your name. This revelation shifts everything. You stop fearing betrayal because you understand that betrayal is proof of elevation. You stop mourning over enemies because you see that their existence confirms your assignment. Without opposition, purpose remains untested. Without testing, strength remains theoretical. Psalm 27 teaches that the righteous do not need to search for revenge because God's justice is comprehensive. It not only vindicates but educates. It teaches you discernment, endurance, humility, and compassion. When you see your enemies fall, you no longer rejoice in their pain, but in God's faithfulness. You realize that what tried to harm you has only strengthened your spirit. The betrayal that once made you weep now makes you wise. The silence that once frightened you now becomes your sanctuary. Heaven's silence is not empty, it is pregnant with purpose. The longer it lasts, the greater the birth it conceals. Every tear shed in secret is watering the soil of future glory. Every sleepless night becomes an investment in spiritual authority. Every misunderstanding is preparing a stage where truth will stand radiant. When God finally speaks, the same mouths that gossiped will fall silent, not out of fear, but out of awe. They will see that while they spoke, you prayed, while they plotted, you waited, while they doubted, you grew, and in that growth lies your true victory. When God finally moves, he does not do so quietly. The same silence that once concealed his plan gives way to thunderous revelation. Suddenly, everything that was hidden becomes clear. Those who doubted your calling see it confirmed. Those who underestimated you watch in disbelief as grace elevates you beyond reach. You will not need to defend your journey because your life itself will preach. That is the justice of heaven, subtle in preparation, undeniable in manifestation. You must never confuse stillness with stagnation. Just because you cannot see movement does not mean nothing is happening. The seed does not appear to move while buried, yet within it, transformation is constant. Likewise, when you are hidden in God's silence, your destiny is germinating. What looks like delay is design. What feels like stillness is strategy. God is aligning every event, every person, every timing, so that when the moment comes, no one will be able to claim credit. When enemies plot in secret, they think they have time, but they forget that time itself belongs to God. Every second they use for harm becomes evidence against them. Every lie they spread becomes the background against which truth will shine brighter. Every betrayal they commit becomes the soil from which your testimony will grow. And when the reversal happens, it will be perfect, not partial, not delayed, but complete. God does not restore halfway. He redeems fully. You will see it. You will stand in moments where you realize that everything that hurt you served you. The silence that once crushed your spirit will become your peace. The betrayal that once broke your heart will become your foundation. The delay that once frustrated you will become your protection. Every secret plot will turn into public proof that light cannot be defeated. That is the essence of Psalm 27. That divine light not only reveals, but reverses. There is an authority that comes from surviving silence. Those who have walked through seasons of hidden warfare carry a quiet power that cannot be imitated. They no longer react to slander, for they have seen truth vindicate itself. They no longer fear rejection, for they have seen how isolation becomes incubation. They no longer chase validation, for they have learned that being misunderstood by man often means being recognized by God. Such souls walk through life with unshakable peace. They know that heaven's silence is not neglect, but trust. God trusts them enough to remain quiet, knowing they will still believe. And that is where true maturity begins, when your faith no longer depends on noise. When you can stand in silence and still sing, wait in darkness and still believe, love your enemies and still hope. That kind of faith terrifies the enemy because it cannot be manipulated. It is not swayed by appearances or controlled by emotion. It is anchored in revelation. It knows that even in silence, God speaks through outcomes. If you are in a season where God seems silent and enemies seem loud, do not despair. You are not losing. You are being refined. You are not forgotten. You are being hidden. The silence that surrounds you is not emptiness. It is evidence. Evidence that heaven is constructing something greater than words could explain. When the time comes, it will not be a whisper, but a declaration. A manifestation so undeniable that every shadow planned against you will disappear in the brilliance of his justice. So remain still. Do not waste your strength on explanations. Do not let bitterness poison your waiting. Let heaven fight for you in its own way, at its own pace. Trust that the same God who was silent during David's trials was also preparing David's throne. And when your moment of unveiling arrives, you will see that the silence was mercy, not absence. You will see that every shadow only made his light more visible. Before you continue, if you believe that even in silence, heaven is fighting for you, and that every hidden plan against you will soon be revealed and reversed, subscribe to this channel and stay connected to receive more messages that strengthen your faith and remind you that every shadow planned against you disappears when God responds in silence. There comes a moment in every believer's life when the light of God is no longer something they merely seek, but something they become. It is the moment when fear, though still present in the world, loses its grip on the soul. Psalm 27 was not written by a man unfamiliar with danger. It was born from a life that had seen betrayal, war, and solitude. Yet David stood unbroken, proclaiming, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" These are not the words of a man untouched by pain. They are the declaration of someone who has learned that light is not the absence of darkness, but the authority over it. To walk fearlessly in divine light is not to live a life free from shadows, but to move through them, knowing they have no claim on you. The light of God does not eliminate every challenge. It transforms how you perceive them. It reveals that every threat is temporary, every storm has purpose, and every valley ends in revelation. The fearless walk is not about courage born of ego. It is about confidence born of communion. It is the assurance that wherever you go, you do not walk alone. The same light that guided Israel by fire in the wilderness now burns within you, guiding, protecting, and illuminating every step. Fear is not defeated by denial, it is defeated by revelation. When you realize that God's light is within you, fear becomes irrational. How can darkness threaten the one who carries dawn inside? Yet many believers live as though the night were stronger than the morning. They forget that fear survives only in ignorance. The moment you remember who walks with you, fear loses form. It becomes nothing more than a shadow, large in shape but empty in substance. Every time you choose trust over worry, every time you refuse to bow to anxiety, every time you speak truth when silence would be safer, you push back against the empire of fear. That is the true warfare of faith, not against flesh and blood, but against the illusions that try to make you forget your divine identity. Fear thrives on imagination. It shows you images of failure, abandonment, rejection, and death, whispering that the future is unsafe. But divine light reveals that the future is already written, and its author cannot fail. You are not walking into uncertainty, you are walking into fulfillment. What looks like a new chapter is often a continuation of a story God began long ago. Every trial, every waiting season, every unanswered prayer is part of that unfolding. The fearless soul understands that time is not an enemy, but an ally. It is the canvas upon which eternity paints faith. When you surrender to that rhythm, peace replaces panic. You stop demanding explanations and start experiencing revelation. To walk fearlessly is to understand that your safety does not depend on circumstances, but on alignment. As long as you walk in light, darkness cannot touch you. That does not mean the absence of opposition. It means immunity from its influence. The devil may roar, but light silences his authority. He may threaten, but threats cannot enter where faith stands guard. Walking in divine light means you no longer measure your peace by what happens around you, but by what burns within you. The light of God is not an external force you summon through prayer. It is the internal flame that prayer awakens. David faced spears, betrayal, and armies, yet he never let fear define him. Even in his moments of weakness, he knew that the light of God would find him again. That light is relentless. It pursues, it restores, it reclaims. No sin is too dark for it, no failure too final. God's light does not shame, it transforms. It exposes not to humiliate, but to heal. When you let that light touch your deepest wounds, they become windows through which His glory shines. Fear cannot dwell in a soul that has surrendered everything to divine illumination. Once you have seen yourself through God's eyes, forgiven, chosen, loved, no accusation can terrify you again. Walking in divine light also means walking in obedience. Fear often disguises itself as caution. It whispers, "Wait until it's safer. Wait until you understand." But faith rarely begins with understanding. It begins with movement. The Red Sea did not part until Moses stepped forward. The walls of Jericho did not fall until Joshua walked in circles that made no logical sense. Divine light reveals the next step, not the whole journey. To walk fearlessly is to move even when you cannot see beyond the glow of today. God does not give you light for tomorrow until you have walked faithfully in the light of now. Every time you obey the inner prompting of the Spirit, even when it contradicts human logic, you are declaring that fear no longer governs your choices. Fear plans, faith moves. Fear waits for confirmation, faith becomes the confirmation. The fearless walk is not reckless, it is deeply rooted in trust. It is the kind of trust that says, even if I fail, I will fall in the direction of obedience. God honors that kind of faith because it mirrors his own character, unafraid, creative, free. You cannot walk fearlessly while clinging to control. Fear feeds on the illusion that you can manage outcomes, but the truth is that every attempt to control is a confession of distrust. When you let go and surrender, you are not losing power, you are returning it to its rightful owner. The moment you stop trying to be your own protector, you discover that you have always been protected. Fear tells you to build walls. Light teaches you to build altars. Walls keep others out. Altars invite God in. Walking fearlessly means dismantling the barriers built by worry and allowing his presence to occupy every space of your mind. Fearless people are not those who never tremble. They are those who tremble but move anyway. They know that courage is not a feeling, but a decision. Even Jesus in Gethsemane felt the weight of fear, yet he walked forward into destiny. The fearless walk acknowledges pain, but refuses to bow to it. It sees danger, but remembers deliverance. It feels loneliness, but knows divine companionship. When you live in that awareness, every moment becomes sacred. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to reveal God's light through your response. There is a certain stillness that accompanies fearlessness, a calm that cannot be imitated. It is not arrogance, but surrender. You stop explaining yourself to people who misunderstand you. You stop defending yourself against accusations. You realize that your peace is too precious to trade for opinions. When you walk fearlessly, you no longer need to be understood because you are known by God. And being known by him is enough. You are no longer driven by validation, but by revelation. The light within you becomes your direction, your defense, and your definition. Psalm 27 closes with a command, not a suggestion. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart. Fearless living is sustained by waiting well. The impatient heart is always vulnerable to fear because it demands visible progress. But faith waits with quiet confidence, knowing that divine timing is never late. Waiting in light is not stagnation, it is maturation. It is the place where roots grow deep enough to hold future glory. God uses seasons of stillness to strengthen the foundation of your courage. The fearless soul does not need proof because presence is enough. To walk fearlessly in divine light also means to love without conditions. Fear builds distance, love closes it. When you love purely, without calculation or self-protection, you mirror the heart of God. Fear cannot exist in that frequency. That is why perfect love casts out fear. Not because it argues with it, but because it operates at a higher vibration of truth. When you forgive those who hurt you, when you bless those who curse you, when you choose compassion over judgment, you are walking in divine light. You are declaring that nothing external has the power to corrupt your inner state. The fearless soul loves even when unloved, gives even when unappreciated, and hopes even when disappointed. You were not created to walk in fear, but in dominion. From the beginning, God placed his breath within humanity so that we could reflect his authority. Fear entered through separation. The moment Adam hid from the presence of God, darkness found a home. Ever since, humanity has been trying to reclaim that original confidence. Through Christ, that restoration is complete. The light that once shone outside now lives within. When you walk in awareness of that truth, fear becomes irrelevant. You no longer pray from desperation, but from inheritance. You are not begging for light, you are releasing it. Walking fearlessly also means walking humbly. True strength does not need to shout. The greatest warriors in the kingdom of God are often the quietest souls. They do not boast about faith, they live it. Their confidence is invisible but undeniable. They radiate peace in chaos, speak gently in conflict, and stand firm in uncertainty. Their fearlessness is not loud, it is luminous. It comes from having died to the need for control. They no longer seek safety in predictability because they have found safety in presence. Fearless faith transforms how you see failure. What once seemed like defeat becomes direction. Every mistake becomes material for growth. You begin to realize that nothing truly fails in the hands of God. Everything is repurposed. Even your darkest seasons become testimonies of grace. Fearlessness is not perfection, it is perseverance. It is choosing to rise again after falling, not out of pride, but because the light within refuses to stay hidden. When you walk fearlessly in divine light, you become a beacon for others. Your peace becomes contagious. People drawn to your presence are not admiring you. They are sensing the reflection of God's steadiness. Your life becomes a sermon that needs no words. The way you handle adversity, the way you forgive, the way you wait, all of it preaches louder than your voice. And that is how the kingdom expands, not through noise, but through light. To walk fearlessly is to become untouchable, not because you are invisible to pain, but because pain no longer defines you. You see everything from a higher perspective. Loss becomes lesson, betrayal becomes purification, delay becomes destiny. You start to thank God not only for what he gives, but for what he withholds. You understand that unanswered prayers are not denials, but divine redirections. You stop asking, "Why me?" and start saying, "Use me." That shift in consciousness is the mark of a fearless soul. Even in your final moments on earth, the light remains. Death itself loses its power over those who walk in divine illumination. For them, the grave is not an ending, but a passage. Fear cannot follow them beyond it. To walk fearlessly in divine light is to begin eternity now. To live every day with the awareness that you are already part of the everlasting. Your life becomes a living psalm, your breath a constant prayer, your heart a vessel of light that no darkness can contain. When you walk fearlessly, heaven and earth recognize you. Creation responds differently to those who walk in alignment. Doors open, paths clear, obstacles dissolve, not because you command them, but because you flow with the order of divine reality. Light does not force, it reveals. And when you walk as light, everything that belongs to you finds its way without struggle. The fearless walk is not striving, it is shining. And so Psalm 27 ends where it began. In light, the Lord is my light and my salvation. It begins with identity and ends with confidence. It begins in declaration and ends in peace. To walk fearlessly in divine light is to live those words every day. To wake up knowing that no shadow planned against you can stand. To move through life without apology for the glory you carry. To stand in the middle of storms and still whisper, "Whom shall I fear?" You will still feel wind, but it will no longer move you. You will still see darkness, but it will no longer define you. Because once the light of God fills your being, fear becomes nothing more than a faint memory of a life you no longer live. You have entered the refuge of divine confidence, where every shadow disappears at the command of your peace. That is not arrogance, it is awareness. the awareness that you are not separate from the light, you are its reflection on earth. So walk on, not timidly, not cautiously, but boldly. Walk as one who knows the end of the story before the middle unfolds. Walk as one who carries heaven within. The world may grow darker, but your light will only shine brighter. Do not dim it to make others comfortable. Do not hide it to avoid attention. You are the evidence of God's goodness, the embodiment of Psalm 27 in motion. Walk fearlessly, for the Lord your light goes before you, surrounds you, and dwells within you. And if you believe that you were called to walk fearlessly in the divine light of God, that no shadow planned against you can stand, and that His presence is your eternal strength, subscribe to this channel and stay connected to messages that awaken your spirit and remind you that every shadow disappears when the light of God shines through you.